Hi, and welcome back. I'm glad you're back. So, in part two of my conversion story, I talked about coming into the Catholic faith, and I came into the church through a church in downtown Chicago called St. John Cantius. It's a somewhat famous Catholic church, um, especially among traditionalists. They don't have an order, but they're beginning to have an order is the best way I could describe it. They're not an autonomous order, but they, like the Benedictines would be, but they were established as a community of men, and they are working toward independence. I guess that's the best way to describe it. But anyway, they're a diocesan parish that has an order of men, and I attended that church then after my conversion for, let's see, I converted in 2011, and I attended that church until 2019. And at the time, I absolutely loved the community. I was having so much fun. I was a children's choir director there, and I had so many friends at that church. And it was a wonderful, beautiful community. It was absolutely wonderful. And but I noticed that, now looking back on my time there, that I started to develop sort of what I would best describe as a real spiritual pride. For those who don't know about this church, it is huge and beautiful and has a lot of money and a beautiful music program, and they spend a lot of time rightly worshiping God. So that is their charism, is to restore the sacred. And so they have a heavy emphasis on the arts. They have a heavy emphasis on music. Everything is beautiful. Everything is polished and lovely. And there's an extreme reverence at that Mass. And the many Masses that they do. So they do a Tridentine Mass, they do a Novus Ordo Mass in English, and then they do a regular English Mass at this church. And there were thousands of parishioners. It's a very popular church in Chicago. And so it felt like that was the only church that I could possibly be a part of. Like, it was, being a part of that community, it was like, this is it. This is the best church in the world. This is the most beautiful church in the world. They have the most beautiful music program. Everything is beautiful. All of the parishioners are wonderful and devout, and they all have these giant families. And this is the place that one is Catholic if they live in Chicago. That was at least what I thought. I do love traditionalism. I came into the church through this church because I was really drawn by the traditional Latin Mass, which I still love. I do not attend a traditional Latin Mass regularly anymore. And so I loved and appreciated that aspect of this church, but I believe that there were a series of things that happened that led me to believe that I needed to leave. And so I did. I left Cantius along with at that time I had 5 children. My husband was not Catholic yet and still kind of stubbornly refusing to join the church, which I will say is probably my fault. I was very, very prideful about my spirituality, like I said before, and especially in relationship to this beautiful church that I was singing in. I became highly critical of everyone that didn't share my belief and the way that I worship. And I don't know if people would have picked up on that in my regular life. Like, I think I'm a pretty open-minded person and get along with people well. And a lot of my friends are not Catholic, and I don't think that it's not even a judgment against them per se. For me, it was more of a judgment against what I thought was wrong in the church on the whole, which I, felt that everything was, that the worship is not complete, that there's not enough reverence in the church at large, and that, they need to, completely overhaul the liturgy, expand the Latin Mass. And, there was this it was judgment. I was judgmental about my fellow Catholics, and I thought that this was the way that we ought to be Catholic. And a series of things happened at St. John's that led me to leave, and I realized I had to leave. I had to go. And at the time, that was a very emotionally difficult thing to go through. It was extremely painful for me. I lost a ton of friends or I just lost contact with a lot of friends. I didn't really lose friends per se, but I lost my spiritual home, and I lost a lot of relationships at that church because of my decision to leave. And again, my husband was not Catholic, so this was a decision that I was making for myself and for my Catholic children. And so I left St. John's with a lot of sorrow and a lot of hurt feelings. I think probably, and many people were very hurt at that time. It's a long, drawn out story that I won't be sharing here today, at least. But yes, so I decided to go, and I do believe, looking back on that was necessary for my spiritual development, that God had to take away the attachment that I had to that particular parish and that particular community, and had to kind of pull me out of that in order to prove to me that I am in fact a Catholic, that I am not simply somebody that goes to a Latin Mass, that I am Catholic every day and every hour of the week, not just when I'm in a beautiful Tridentine liturgy. And so I ended up going to my local parish just down the street. One of my friends was the music director there, and she was also a singer at Canchas and also left Canchas, and she's also a convert. And so, in fact, the same priest that I think was instrumental in my conversion at St. John Canchas was instrumental in her conversion when she was at St. John Canchas. This priest was pretty magical. He was the music director at St. John's at the time, and has also left. We left the church at the same time, actually. And he's an archdiocesan priest right now. I ended up going to my local parish, which is God's intention. That's God's intention for us, I guess. I mean, we have all these churches in our neighborhoods, and that's where we're supposed to be worshiping. And I sang there as a cantor, and I was in their choir. And it was wonderful. It was so wonderful. I loved it, and the community was great. And they had a big school there. And so our children do not go to the local Catholic school, but the children at that, the families at that church are very, they're very devoted to that community because there is a school there. And I absolutely loved going there. And then COVID hit, and all the churches were shut down. And the music director who was there had to kind of overhaul the whole system. And so they got rid of the choir, obviously, because, they didn't want people singing in, large groups of people. And so they went to cantors only. And so I was cantoring there. I was cantoring at a couple of other churches once the churches sort of opened up after COVID. But that was a really tricky time for us because, there were limits on how many people could go to church, and you had to sign up ahead. Well, everybody knows, if you're Catholic, you're watching this, you know how hard that was. So our family was sort of thrown again into this total upheaval, and ended up leaving that church community-ish. We're still very much a part of it. I go there for daily Mass quite a bit. And we love that church, but the music director changed, and they were looking for a different style than what I can provide as a cantor. And so they went to more kind of pop music, and I'm not a pop singer. I can do it, but I'm more comfortable with a more traditional liturgy. So I ended up going to another church that's just very close to us, and also very close to us, but not our neighborhood parish. And they do a more kind of reverent, not that the other church isn't reverent, but they do a more subdued service with chant and hymns and things like that. And so that's where I settled after the pandemic was over. Which leads me to my next sort of journey, which was when I had my sixth baby. And this is when I really... Okay. Anyway, my daughter had to be induced early because I developed severe preeclampsia a couple weeks before she was due. And it was very scary. They thought that there was something, I was very sick. My baby was fine, luckily, mercifully. But it really got me thinking about what am I doing? Because I'm going to these churches, I sing all the time. I'm a devout Catholic, kind of. I mean, I always went to Mass. I didn't ever, I avoided mortal sin and things like that. Like, I accepted the teachings of the church, but my spiritual development was just in it wasn't really happening. Like I was kind of treading water. And then a friend of mine who had had cancer for years passed away. And this woman was a saint. Like she is a saint. I'm convinced that she's in heaven. I'm convinced she is a saint. I'm not the only person that feels this way. This is like, kind of understood among our community. She was an amazing, amazing woman. And we're actually coming up on the year anniversary of her death. But she touched me in a very deep way at the stories of her life. I didn't know her terribly well. We were friends. We were not super close friends. But I sort of watched her in the periphery and was always very astounded by her saintliness. And there were a few other women that I was around that had been through some terrible trials of just terrible, terrible trials. A friend of mine, her child died of a genetic disease, and watching her kind of accept God's will in that and watching her grow in her faith, or just sort of rely on her faith to guide her, was very, very moving to me, and it taught me a lot. So this was all kind of gearing up to prepare me for my diagnosis of stage 4 breast cancer, which I will spare you the details of that diagnosis. Suffice it to say, I had a lump and I went in to have it checked out, and it turns out I had a very widespread cancer, kind of all over my body and in my liver and my bones and kind of everywhere. Although I haven't had a liver biopsy, so I'm going to say maybe that's not, maybe I don't really have it in my liver, but it showed up on a PET scan. And in that moment when I was diagnosed, I realized, hey, I have to do this. Like this is a make or break situation. Like I need to make a decision to set my will on God. I cannot delay this any longer. I am not going to necessarily, I don't know how much time I will have on this earth. I mean, I might be cured. We don't know. We're hoping for a cure, but we don't know. But a diagnosis like that gets you kind of on the path. And it is a very severe, sudden change. For anybody I know who's experienced this, either something like that will make you kind of turn away from the faith or just run towards it. And mercifully, God gave me the grace to run toward him. And the last 8 months, I have experienced such profound spiritual growth. And it's not really because of anything I've done necessarily. It's definitely God's will. But in just kind of learning how to surrender all the time to what he wants from me, and learning to offer up all of my sufferings and just accept them all as from him for my spiritual benefit, has been a profound journey. And after I was diagnosed, my husband, who had been thinking about becoming Catholic actually for a couple months before my diagnosis. So it was not necessarily my diagnosis that brought him into the faith, but he did finally, after 12 years of being married to a Catholic woman with 6 Catholic kids, he decided to enter the church. And that was over Lent. He didn't enter on Easter, but he entered a couple weeks into Lent, and it was, this amazing time for us. And now I am a Catholic wife, which is amazing. Like, this man is leading me spiritually, and it is so wonderful to have that other person to share the faith with, and to sort of offload a lot of the burdens that are on a spouse when they are the only ones that are leading their family in the faith. And so, yeah, that's where we are right now. And so that is my conversion, and like a little bit into my, spiritual journey. There's obviously like a million other things to say, but I will not be saying them at this time. And I hope to see you guys in the next video. Okay, bye-bye.